A quick word to let you know that if you pledge $10 or more to the Creative Control Patreon page throughout April 2017, you will receive one Creative Control t-shirt while supplies last. I have the maroon one with my head on it, and the sort of yellow one with the pizza lettering, and in unisex, small, medium, large, and extra large sizes. So if you'd like to support the show and receive a small, medium, large, or extra large token of my appreciation, visit patreon.com/creativecontrol to view the shirts and pledge $10 or more today. Thanks! Tim Darcy is an exciting and provocative American poet, singer, songwriter, musician, and performer currently based in Montreal, Quebec. Well respected for his work as a dynamic vocalist and intricate lyricist in the band Ought, Darcy recently stepped out for a record and tour under his own name. Here's a sample of the aforementioned album's title track, Saturday Night.
I wish I'd run away sooner to save time. I wish I'd run away sooner to uncloud my mind. And all that's left of me is what I know. And what I know is what's mine's not mine. But if I follow that to the center, that I might unwind.
Saturday Night was released by Jaguar Records in February 2017, and Darcy and his band have already crossed parts of Canada, the United States, and Europe to spread the word about it and play some shows. With some more concerts ahead of him, Tim and I caught up for a chat a few weeks ago where we discussed his experience at this year's controversial South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas, which faced backlash over performance limits they imposed on traveling musicians, the political climate and consciousness in America and Canada, how writing with and playing in Ought has influenced him as a solo artist, what's up with the new Ought record and his own musical plans, and much more. Sponsored by Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, this is Tim Darcy on the 313th episode of Creative Control with me, Vish Khanna. Hi Tim, how you doing?
Hey Vish, how's it going?
Pretty well. I'm here in Guelph. Where are you?
I'm in Toronto right now, actually.
You're in Toronto. I didn't know you spent time in Toronto. I think of you as a Montreal guy. Why are you in Toronto?
Well, I just got back from a 5-week-long tour around the solo record I made, and the two people in the band are Toronto-based, so it made sense for me to be hanging out here. And also, I'm currently seeing somebody who lives in Toronto, so I'm hanging out here a bit. It's two birds with one stone kind of situation.
Right, and
is
how?
That TMI? I think that might be TMI for podcast. But.
No, podcasts are all about TMI. I was actually going to name this podcast TMI at one point, but because people tend to tell me things they probably shouldn't. So it's just a thing that happens. How was your 5-week tour?
It was really good. Yeah, it was really very different and like. The first time I'd ever gone out playing solo songs with a full band, and I mean, other than I guess like maybe 2 shows prior to this tour, one of which you were at, the Pop Montreal show. But yeah, and this was the first time when we actually had like a couple of weeks leading up to the tour to like really hone the live set, and but it was really good. Like the crowds were great, and it was a good experience, and definitely like a good kind of just learning experience for me of just doing something really different.
I want to get back to that Pop Montreal show in a moment, but where did you actually go on this tour?
We did, in Canada, it was just Toronto and Montreal, and then we toured down to South by, like down the East Coast, and then shot up the middle again, like through to Chicago. And then we did a week in Europe, where we like flew into London, and then went over and did like Brussels and Amsterdam, and then 2 shows in France, that sort of thing.
And how was touring the States?
It was really good. Yeah, we did that whole leg of the tour with this artist Molly Birch, who has a record out on Captured Tracks right now, and they were really, really nice, wonderful people. Her record kind of has like almost like a really, really old school sort of like jazz vocalist, like kind of chanteuse sort of vibe. So it's just like really cool, like kind of different from like normal indie rock sort of vibe. And the shows were really good. I think some highlights were Chicago was an amazing show. Ott has good shows there as well. And South by was crazy. It's such a weird scene. I had never been before. And I've never encountered a music festival like that where the crowds really had this very particular energy to them, where it was like obviously so many industry people, so many tired bands, and people who are going to see like 12 shows a day or whatever. But on the whole, it was still cool to like run into, other artists who are down there and that sort of thing.
It was a rather controversial year for South by Southwest because of it wasn't quite a travel ban, but they basically implied that they wouldn't permit artists playing the festival to play other places. And if they did try to do that, the allegation was that South by Southwest was going to potentially deport them, visiting artists internationally if they violated this clause. Did you hear about that?
I did, yeah.
And so what was it like for you to play a festival with such a clause? Did you think that was blown out of proportion, or what was your take on that?
No, I think especially in the current climate, like it's really important to take things like that seriously, because obviously the matter at hand is really important, but it's also, it feels so much so a part of a larger conversation, and this, really large and significant cultural institution being forced to kind of like clarify, if not alter their stance. I think it was really important, and I was really glad to see how that all went down. But I remember like initially when I first saw like stuff coming up about it, I was like, I want to hold off on posting about like any showcases or whatever that I'm on, because I want to hear this out. Like I want to see what's going to happen. And I saw some really like engaged and like really lefty people coming back and being like, it's just like an insurance thing, which that might be true, but it's also I think it's just a good move to like remove that kind of language that could be seen as being aligned with a kind of xenophobic way of thinking about our country, or thinking about the U.S., our country, thinking about the U.S. and I'm glad that like they like released a statement and like clarified and removed the language. And but yeah, I hearing about like those unofficial shows, like I also, having never been to South by, I didn't realize that like for a lot of artists, like the unofficial shows were like people actually got some refuge from like all the industry crap, because you could just go and like play a show with some bands that you really liked and kind of make real connections with people. And I think that seems like a super important element to preserve, especially because so many, the majority of the bands aren't getting paid, and you're kind of just going down there to like I don't know, kind of like lay down in front of some kind of invisible godhead or whatever. It feels really weird.
Well, there is the perception that just there's an opportunity to be seen and heard by going to a festival where whatever 2,000 bands are playing or whatever it is.
But I don't want to give the impression that like I think that it was like a full success, because there were still like a bunch of bands that were barred like by the border services just because, like, not even in reference to the South by thing, just like in reference to like kind of a weird like Trump doctrine that's like not actually law. And that's so scary, that's terrifying, that like that's like essentially fascism.
Yeah, they're already enacting something that hasn't actually been legislated. And I mean, you've said a few telling things there. I asked you about this tour, and you mentioned the pleasant experience you had with your opening band, and just the sort of experience of touring. But you also made a reference to our country. You are American, right?
That is true, yeah.
So I guess when I was asking how was the tour, I wasn't necessarily thinking like, hey, did you have a good time on stage? I meant you're re-entering your country amidst a lot of turmoil. I guess I wonder, you're a thoughtful guy. This is not healthy on some level, or on every level. It's not a good time for your country, for your home country, America. When I asked how it went, I was kind of leading that way. And you confronted this head on, it sounds like, at South by Southwest. But, I mean, how are you feeling about your home country these days?
I feel both. I feel this kind of sadness, which is one of the most predominant feelings. Just that it feels like an unreality, and it feels like it could have been avoided. Like it seems like the momentum was there on the left to like go a different way, and it's just a real shame that didn't happen. But, I guess the part of me that's also so inspired by a lot of the work that people are doing, and I think people are also taking less for granted now, and taking the idea that any one candidate is going to solve everything less for granted. And I think that's motivating a lot of really amazing and kind of like, potentially first time endeavors of like, people being active with like who they support, both, monetarily, but also like which groups are given attention and that sort of thing. And I think that type of work extends beyond any one candidacy. And so the hopeful part of me feels that maybe like we weren't ready, sort of, like we had to deal with some stuff and like kind of stare like the darkest parts of Western society like directly in the face, which, I mean, it really feels like that's what's happening at this current moment, and sort of work through them and kind of, or at least like confront them head on and shine the light directly on them.
So there are aspects of this calamity that you find heartening?
Yeah, I mean, especially in the sense of like what I see individuals doing, and like people, who I grew up with, people I went to high school with or whatever, and who I've been so inspired by, and like just so heartened by like seeing them get more involved with like being just like very kind of consistently conscientious, and not just like rallying around like a particular candidate, and just being generally more informed. And obviously I think that I don't want to like valorize this moment, because I think that we have to be like really vigilant, and obviously like it's a shame, like there's just going to be some like bad shit that goes down under the Trump administration. And I'm really heartened by, like watching the ACLU and like watching like the support that's like coming around Planned Parenthood, and feeling like those groups, in addition to like many, many other smaller groups who need the attention and need the money, and maybe aren't getting it quite as much, but who are just doing really amazing stuff, and like kind of attempting to draw lines in the sand that again, like extend beyond like one candidate or extend beyond one tiny political moment, and are more just about like human decency and like human rights and like how we like build and support a community of people.
Yeah, it does seem that despite the defeat, there's a large cohort of people that are refusing to be defeated by this. In fact, like you say, I think it's actually spurred them to act in ways that they might not have thought to do because they maybe took certain things for granted. Of course, who could have foreseen what was coming?
Of course.
On some level, I guess some of us were caught off guard. And I mean, when you speak, did you talk to people at shows about these things? Did you talk to people who were coming out and trying to get their sense of things as people who actually live in the cities you were visiting?
Yeah, there'd be people who would come up and, we'd have talks, and definitely like as a touring cohort, like there were 8 of us, and, it would come up a lot, and talking about the state of things and talking about Bernie Sanders and but it's, it comes up a lot in interviews, which I think is not even that it's unavoidable. I think it's just that it's so on everybody's minds. Like nobody wants to, it almost feels wrong to like not mention it, or it does feel wrong to not mention it. Like even I just read this morning this New Yorker article about watches, and it like circled back to like talking about Trump at some point in the article, and it didn't feel forced. It felt so germane to just like a current article being written on any topic.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way to avoid it. I'm certainly not avoiding it on this program, and I'm trying to talk to people about it, because obviously whatever's happening in America we feel the implications and ramifications up in Canada, and I know in this case it's around the world. I actually remember the first time we spoke, it was with Ott, your band Ott, and everyone was gathered around a computer, and I remember you guys were anyway, I guess I was too, but I remember that we were talking about your first record and the fact that you all sort of met up and connected in Montreal, and how the sort of protests and riots that would occur, maybe they weren't riots, maybe they were peaceful. I think they were peaceful demonstrations. But I remember the protest culture in Montreal was really inspiring to you guys. And I remember, as I recall it really informed your work. Does living in Montreal, is that an inspiring thing for you still? Am I way off the mark here? Maybe I'm misremembering. Does any of that resonate with you?
No, I mean, you're right on the money. Yeah, I mean, that moment was so inspiring, just in the sense of like feeling a kind of like a very human communalism that I hadn't experienced up till then in American politics. I mean, obviously I'm a young person, so I can't like reach too far back, but
this was as I recall, it was protests surrounding education, or
I mean, there's a pretty grand history of that in Quebec, and I think as far as in the U.S., I think maybe part of what I'm talking about right now, of like the hopeful side of all of this, is seeing something similar to that, like obviously much more spread out, and there are very direct correlations, like people being in the street, and like I think it was the Women's Day March that was the largest mass gathering of people worldwide in human history.
I believe that's correct, yes. And
that's incredible. That's so significant, and it feels so like that it makes me feel, I hope not naively, but it makes me really feel like this moment is a sort of the night is darkest before the dawn kind of moment. And
I'm choosing to believe that as well. I'm choosing to believe that all of this suffering and pain and frustration is actually feeding something positive.
Yeah, but of course we have to remain active on the other side. Not on the other side, but I think maybe that's part of it, is like kind of ending this like constant, I mean, especially in American politics, this constant like A-B switch of just like this or that, and moving towards a sort of third way, or I mean, I hate to even say like third way, but just like a more broad sense of like, again, how we think about one another and like what we actually care about, that moves beyond like a kind of just incessant seesawing between two extremes that feel increasingly, and I guess thankfully, very thankfully, like irrelevant to how people want to think about the future that they're going to build.
It does seem, I think anyway, we're shifting away from binary processing. It makes it sound like a computer, but we tend to look at things as right and wrong and black and white. And I feel like with the way we consume culture, and which is, I think, never been more open-ended, I feel like people are starting to unbox themselves from these notions of yes or no. Perhaps there's a third way of doing it. Is that something was that what you were getting at there?
I totally feel that. And I think that that's amazing. And I think that once you start moving into that space, which is maybe initially kind of frightening in a sort of caged animal sort of way, of like coming out into the open. And I don't want to like make any kind of like, I don't mean caged animal in like a negative way. I mean it purely in like a metaphorical way, like having, gone through some of that myself. I mean, I was very lucky to have like a very open-minded upbringing and like a parent who was very open-minded, but I've still definitely experienced how great it feels to be surrounded by very open-minded people, and how like freeing that is to the spirit. And I think talking about how people consume culture is also really important, because people being exposed to lots of just difference is, I think, really I think it's kind of undeniable. Like you can't like look around at all the sort of wonder of the world, as it were, and not feel like a bit like small if you just want to like stay in your kind of like fearful corner.
But I think that's what's inspiring certain people to cling to that smallness, to that uniformity. This is not even to necessarily disparage them. It does seem archaic to me that you would want to limit your experience or and in turn limit the experiences of others. But that is what it is. It's a paranoia about things changing and shifting. And you were saying that, you were lucky to have an upbringing that there was an open-mindedness to it, I guess is what you were saying, right?
Yeah. But I think also, I mean, the two things that I would bring up, which I'm sure you already know, is one, that map that went around right after the election, which is what the election results would have looked like if only 18 to like 35-year-olds or 18 to 30-year-olds had voted. And
there were a few different maps like that. Like what would happen if only women voted? Or
And the map was like all blue. And there's also I read this really fascinating statistic that apparently the approval of gay marriage amongst adults in the most progressive state on gay marriage, which I think is Massachusetts, is still lower than the approval rating of, again, just one topic, but gay marriage in the least progressive state on the topic, which is like Alabama or something. So again, like it's not anything that you can totally like, just say like, okay, the work is done, but it is so inspiring. It's so amazing that amongst young people in the least progressive state on this topic, there's a higher approval of gay marriage than, again, in Massachusetts. And to me, there's this sort of, I mean, hopefully undeniable wave of consciousness coming in that I really, really hope just sets like a new high watermark for how people think about each other. And then the things that we quibble over on like a societal level are, way more minute. And And when I look at the Republican Party, but when I look at the Trump administration, I feel like there's just so much fear there. Like, it's like you said, these people, these like decaying white men, like oligarchs, they're just afraid of losing their status because they have no actual seat of confidence and their confidence doesn't come from a place of like thinking that they're good people or that they've been like good parents or that they have love in their life. It's that they have a sort of like oligarchic power over people. And I heard somebody say the other day that, I think that these people are just so afraid of death that they want to bring everybody down with them. And I think that there's something to that. I think that whatever it is, there's just the whole thing reeks of fear. And I think that like love and hopefully, compassion will that sort of tide will wash over it.
Yeah, and I think that speaks into policy making that doesn't take the future into account. I think there's a weird, narrow-minded focus on. I mean, that's why the EPA is slowly being dismantled by this administration in the States, and why we in Canada had to deal with the same thing. I don't think actually things are much better with our Liberal government than they were the Conservative, but on some level that's a other complicated thing that I don't end up talking about as much as I should on the show. I've talked to so many American artists about America, and we talk. Even when I talk to Canadian artists, I guess sometimes I'm very fixated on the Trump stuff, and I feel like we sometimes in Canada are oblivious to what's happening in our own country in terms of equally problematic and damaging legislation and policy making. So, but and I don't want to brush that aside. I mean, if you have things to say about that, I'd like to hear them because you possess an interesting duality. You live in Canada, but you were where were you raised again? Were you raised in Arizona?
I was born in Arizona. I was raised in New Hampshire. New
Hampshire, right? Which is, I actually don't know. Is New Hampshire was that a nice state to live in?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really small town, but I think as far as upbringings go, it was pretty solid. I had good friends, and yeah.
So, what is your perspective? You've been in Canada, what, like 10 years, 8 years, something like that?
Yeah, I think it's coming up on 8.
8, right? So, what do you make of our country in relation to yours? Do you feel like we have a false sense of progressiveness, or do you think that on some level we are maybe more advanced in our thinking than the States? Are we smug? What is it? What do you make of us, Tim?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that are undeniable. Things like healthcare. That obviously is a really hot button topic right now. And the thing is, my mom was a nurse, and so I feel like I got a lot of insight into like how essential that is to someone's stability as a human. And it's something that is so easy to take for granted. As a child, for various reasons, I was in and out of the hospital a lot, and I can't imagine if I hadn't had access to care, just the kind of base level of, again, stability that provides to someone being able to then, even think about school, and that, on that level, I think Canada is more advanced. And I think that I really hope that not even within my lifetime, but within the next 4 to 5 years, we see something similar happen in the U.S. And something like 65% of Americans want single-payer healthcare now. And I think that my whole heart yearns for that to happen, because I think that would be such an enormous step forward, because also having a really stable and successful nationwide kind of I don't want to say socialist program, but something like that, I think would also really open people's minds up to like the huge benefits of systems like that. Even thinking then about like, free secondary education and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm also reticent to like weigh in on differences because, as you said, there are these really hopeful candidates that come along, and I think that there is something significant like about having a candidate like Obama or Trudeau, where it feels like even the fact that there's someone who is clearly just has like a humanity to them, I think it almost like it doesn't, of course, mean that any kind of progress is necessarily going to come. I mean, there were definitely big advances and big setbacks in the Obama administration as far as, militaristically, it was heartbreaking. But then socially, there were a lot of really amazing moments, and
socially, domestically,
yeah, of course. And thinking, I don't know, like there's like this rep that Canada gets of being this like beautiful and like friendly, almost like utopia. And obviously that attitude is dangerous just because it really paints over a lot of terrible things that have happened and a lot of work that really needs to be done.
I think it fosters a complacency that I'm guilty of myself, because we do tend to look down upon, I mean, we literally have to look down upon America because it's below us, but we do tend to look down upon what's happening. I mean, generally, not all of us.
No,
I don't think I do that. I
was just laughing at your look down at America, like your map joke.
Yes, I like to make the odd geography joke on the show, but no, I mean, I think some of us are looking at America right now with some smugness that is unwarranted given what we're going through and what we've done and what we've accomplished and not accomplished.
And Canada is not so far away from the Harper government, which, whatever you think of Trudeau, like that Harper is not so distinct from Trump. No, and we swing both. We as you were saying earlier about or maybe I was saying earlier about this binary, we tend to go in cycles where it's ostensibly a conservative. It's almost always an actually conservative government, but then we have an ostensibly liberal government that tends to be center right or center left, I guess. And yeah, it's complicated. Like I feel like a lot of us up here don't think it's all that great up here either. I know that visiting American artists have made comments about how it's so great to be up in Canada, and I just think, well, Trudeau is for the XL pipeline too, the Keystone pipeline as well. So, what are we actually accomplishing up in Canada that is, we're falling in line on some level, on a federal level as well. So, yeah.
Anyway, who are we? We're just a couple of guys talking about policy and politics, and I did want to draw all of this back to this show I saw you play at Pop Montreal somehow, because we were talking about being boxed in and the freedom we have to think and try things, and the freedom that some people who are traditionalists might reject. But I remember being at that show at Casa del Popolo and seeing you play. You were saying that was a pretty early show, right?
Yeah, I think that was the second.
The second show ever for that configuration.
Yeah.
This configuration, I suppose. I just remember being quite taken with just how all over the place and dynamic it was. It felt, it felt like a clear, exemplary version of punk to me. This notion of just like anything could happen from song to song, but it was all of a whole piece. That seems deliberate on your part. You're trying to express a certain amount of freedom with this project, I think.
Totally, and I'm really grateful I'm really excited to see how that's come across. Like even in interviews and like people who've done, I guess, well, yeah, just to start with that, people talking about hearing a kind of like almost like subconscious element to it, or yeah, like people asking me about like automatic writing and stuff like that. And I think that there is a definitely an element of that, and I think it's sort of just what I needed to do artistically at that moment, which was kind of get back to, and again, like a lot of these songs on Saturday Night they're old songs of mine, and I was feeling a kind of yearning to play in this different style again, and to sort of revisit some of those pastures, so to speak, and sort of see what I might find there. And it sort of came about really organically that there was even a record to speak of, because initially it was just going over to record a song or two,
mm-hmm.
and it just felt so good. And it became clear really immediately that it was something that, I wanted to keep doing. So I actually recorded this record in Toronto with two friends who live here, just because they had free studio access. So I came back maybe 5 or 6 times over the course of a 6-month period, and just slowly would like add another track or two to the mix. And I think it creates a very, it's a unique record, I guess, if I can say that about my own work. In that,
I think you can. You're free to say that.
Yeah, in that there is, it does cover a lot of ground sonically, and there's this through thread, which is that they were all recorded in a particular moment, and obviously it's my voice on every track, but I've just been really gracious and excited that so many people have liked the record, because it is such a personal document, and it is kind of it's different from like a lot of other, studio records.
You say it was a personal document. You mentioned that these songs are old. Or do they actually predate your time in Ott?
A couple of them do, yeah. Like there's the oldest song on the album is Saint Germain, and that predates Ott by a couple of years.
So when you contemplate this as, and I'm sorry, are you kind of insinuating that this is potentially a more personal record than the Ott records you've made?
It definitely is. I mean, the Ott records, we write all of those songs collaboratively, and usually out of long jams. And it doesn't mean that, I wasn't fully invested in those artistic projects. It just means that this record has a soul wellspring, and that's just my self. So in that way, it's inherently more personal.
My impulse, when you say that it's a more personal record, my impulse is to think of it lyrically. So when you say you collaborate on every song with Ott, you're still fundamentally the lyric writer in that band, right?
Yes.
So if you're the lyric writer in both, am I wrong to kind of conflate personal record with your vocal and lyrical expression? Because I feel like that's what I lean towards. That's my default. Like if you say it's a more personal record, I assume it's within the content of what you're saying and how you're saying it. So I'm curious if you can maybe either clarify or elaborate upon that, and also maybe distinguish between the lyric writing in Ott and this collection of songs.
Totally. I think that's a huge element, like what's being said and what's being talked about. And the lyrics on my solo record, they are much more intimate, almost to like a program sort of. The first two Ott records are, they're very far-reaching. They're very, I don't want to say like universalist, but they're like, they're much more like macroscopic in their themes. And that, again, like came up very naturally. Like it was just sort of the nature of the project, like everything being very democratic, everything being written collaboratively. So in a band like that, there was never a moment where, well, I guess that's not true, but it feels much more organic to write more broadly, because there are definitely lyrical moments on the art records that are from a very personal place. Like Habit is a more personal song than
I don't want to blow this out of proportion,
no, not at all.
All I was going to say is that I think of the art records as kind of voice of a I'm not saying you're the voice of a generation, Tim, or your band is, because that would be a weird thing to tell someone.
Very weird, yeah.
In a interview setting, but I did get the sense anyway that you were trying to capture the tone of your generation. You were trying to capture the mood of uncertainty and but also I don't know, righteousness and joy at the possibility of what your generation could accomplish and what your cohort of friends could accomplish. Meaning, like, I felt like, I hesitate to use these words like anthemic, but it did have this sense of, I could tell you were representing more than yourself, and maybe more than your band. That was my sense of it. Whereas this seems far more personal. This seems really about. I don't know you very well, but I get the sense that this is Saturday Night is more about you and how you relate to the world personally.
Yeah. I think that's pretty spot on. And the funny thing is, in art, writing most of the first record, we didn't have a record deal or anything. It was really just a lot of stuff that I was grappling with and thinking about. And I think, the intensity got ramped up a little bit once we thought more people were going to hear it or whatever, but I didn't go back and change lyrics really. And even when we had finished the record, it was the day before the album release, and I remember nobody had any idea that it was even going to get reviewed because that was just not our framework or whatever, and we didn't know if anybody was going to like it. And so in that sense of, I think you're right, but I more just want to clarify just more on the level of that wasn't the project to write songs that were for everyone or whatever, and I think there's a lot of great art that I really admire that does that. And I think maybe that is, other than the circumstances and just the way that I maybe write about things, that influence of being inspired by other art that does kind of consider our humanness ended up with art being the way that it was. And I think you're absolutely right to call my record a more personal record, but it's not like it's a, I would like to think that there are relatable things in there as well, and in the sense of being on the spectrum of just considering life or whatever. It's not considering my life.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what a strong writer like yourself is able to do, is to actually convey something universal, even from a personal anecdote or whatever. And I do think you accomplished that. But there's a couple of things that you said that I want to touch upon in terms of your writing. You invoked the phrase automatic writing, and you said that people were asking you about that. Can you expand upon that? How does that inform your work?
Well, I find that I get surprised by things that I've written automatically, and that those often end up being, I don't mean in the sense of a free write or whatever, which, everybody just has a different process. Some people will intentionally sit down and just fill pages until their brain turns off. And I think that however you can get to that place is great, but for me, it it'll come like I'll get like a little thought, and I'll just run and like grab a notebook and like just like it kind of go like right until the thought disappears. And I'll often,
you're kind of chasing down the thought.
Yeah, and I'll often get poems or lyrics or like little just like shrapnels of ideas that maybe don't end up anywhere from that. And the same thing happens with Ott, like more so. I mean, on the first record, it was more done without a notebook, in that we had so much time before we recorded anything that we would play the songs over and over again, and I would just keep singing until I honed the words. But it is. I don't know. It's not like my process, in that I've also definitely sat down and tried to just finish verses. But I wonder, talking to other lyricists and songwriters, like how much of that ebbs in. Because for me, sometimes it'll be like 3 words that come out seemingly from nowhere, and then it just feels like, oh, okay, well, that's clearly what the song is about, and then I'll have to write around that more concertedly.
Interesting. And do you not dialogue with other writers about their process?
I do, but I don't have, and I listen to a lot of like, especially more and more touring like podcasts. But it seems like people are to varying degrees willing to talk about their process, and also like I think that there's something really sacred that happens in there that you almost like can't shine a light directly on. I read this really great one recently with Mary Oliver. Do you know her?
Yeah.
So I was reading, I guess she has a couple of books like on writing, and she's got some great poetry, but I was reading this entry about her process, and basically her feeling was that through habits, through like a kind of craft, which for her is like, kind of sitting down every morning and like saying that you're going to write for a couple of hours. Like the act of doing that, like, if you start writing every day, you might not get anything good for the first couple of days, or you might not get anything good for a stretch of quite a period. But like creating that sort of craft or habit or whatever you want to call it, a kind of process, like that makes the space available for then like an inspiration to come up. And I really identify with that process. Like I find that if I'm really busy like on tour, or just like a lot of stress or craziness in my life, like I don't feel inspired. I don't feel words coming up at all. But as soon as I start making space to like sit by the window and with my notebook or whatever, like even if it doesn't come right away, that's just like giving yourself that little like pause enables things to start coming up.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me that you cited Mary Oliver, who's a very esteemed poet. And you I think are in this dual world as, again, not only American Canadian, but you're a poet and songwriter.
And then an enigma wrapped in a mystery.
I mean, my understanding is that you started out as a poet, actually, and were kind of put in a position where you had to try to apply that practice to songwriting. Is that accurate?
Totally. And it's been something I've been thinking about more and more in the past year, especially, of like thinking about the differences between those two crafts, because I think that there's a huge amount of overlap between writing words and writing music. Like another artist who I was listening to talk about their process recently was Joanna Newsom, and it seems like she's so mathematical and like writes an essay for each song with like describing the kind of sound world and like what she wants to happen with the instrumentation and the production and in a way that I find that so fascinating. And I definitely know of people who write like a novel in that way, where like they will map out every little detail, and like every character has a backstory and like a zodiac sign and stuff, even if it never makes it into the text, because it's just how that they want to approach their art. And then I definitely know songwriters who they play their guitar, they're self-taught, and they play on the couch and the songs come, and there's a sort of, it's just a different means to an end. And like it's I really feel like it's however you get to that sort of like white hot moment of just making something beautiful or worthwhile or interesting.
Well, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you're informed. I think it's probably healthy that you're informed by the processes and practices of two very strong creative impulses, and that you see how they weave together. Because, I mean, I don't know. I can see all of that in your makeup in terms of what you put out into the world, and I think that's great.
Thanks.
Yeah. Now, I don't know, you were talking about how some of the songs from Saturday Night predate Ought. I assume that some of your experiences in Ought inform some of the songwriting on this record, the solo record?
Totally.
And is there anything in particular you can pinpoint in terms of a song or something that reflects that experience of being an Ought, traveling the world?
Yeah. Well, it definitely, that, the whole experience of being in Ought and being in a band affected like the way I thought about production and that sort of thing on the record. The two friends who recorded it, Amy and Ross, Amy Fort and Ross Gillard, who live in Toronto, they did a lot of amazing work producing the record. Like it really sounds the way it does because they poured so much into it, and it was such a great experience working like in a really tight-knit group like that, thinking about production, which is something that I hadn't really done before, because prior to Ought I had done all my recording on a little 4-track, so production was really just like putting a guitar pedal in between the mic and the 4-track and like kind of like experimenting with like different sounds, and often kind of like drenching things in different effects, or the opposite, just going totally clean. Mm-hmm. And Ought, like, we thought about production more on the second record, but really, that first record, we recorded it in 3 days and mixed it in another 3, I think. And it was so whirlwind, and in a way that I think really suits the songs and suits the energy of the live show. But, again, that kind of like became our sound a little bit, and we all wanted to ramp that up on the second record as far as thinking about tones more, and then even going into the future, I know that's something that people are still excited about, exploring more. So anyways, long way around saying that doing that on this record was really exciting, and definitely it informed from coming out of 2 band studio sessions. And the song Saturday Night, the title track on my solo record, I think is definitely like the most, like that song wouldn't exist if I hadn't been in Ought. And I think that, there's something really cool about that song and how it fits into the record. For me, I really like that it kind of like sort of cracks open the second side a bit. And I think, writing something like that, which was very stream of consciousness, or, not literally, but like that, it was constructed in the studio from like bowed guitar that I had done, and then Charlotte playing drums, and then me kind of doing this vocal incantation, and then we slowly refined it and like added the choir and that sort of thing. But I think having that kind of mindset to think about a track I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't been in Ought. Yeah, well, it has a found sound quality in that sense that you've organized, I guess. Yeah.
It's an adventurous song. Well, I'm curious if you can talk about your plans for Aught and any more plans you have for solo endeavors. In the time we have left, is there any updates in either of those areas?
Totally. Aught is working on a new record. I can't share any more details than that, but
why not? Why? Because of the government?
Yeah, the government is listening to us, Vish. We have to be careful.
Okay.
No,
but you're working on a new record. That's exciting.
Yeah, no, it's essentially done. I guess we're just tinkering with it.
Okay.
And yeah, we're all really excited about it. And for solo stuff, I have a couple more shows this year. I'm playing Baby G in Toronto. I'm playing Pickathon, and I think that's it. Maybe I think there's a college show.
Right.
So now you know. Now you know.
You got a few more shows, but no plans to necessarily write songs in this mode at the moment.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I have, because the Aught record's done. Mostly done, and the Saturday Night was recorded at the same time as Sun Coming Down, so there really has been a bit of leapfrogging that's happened as far as timing of things. So I'm really excited to have had the experience of touring solo and to just kind of set up my 4-track again and write a little bit and work on this Aught record. So it's a good moment right now. I'm feeling really energized by just having taken in a lot of great music and etc. recently, and also just being in touch with family who live in the States and kind of remaining a part of that conversation, but also trying not to spend too much time on Twitter, which is a new resolution for me.
You're an active Twitterer?
I've gotten into it, but I mean, especially after the election and leading up to it, I was just glued to my phone, just in a way that felt so necessary, and still does. But I need to achieve balance in all things.
Nice.
Are you an active Twitterer?
I am, kind of. It's mostly just here's what's on my show, and here's a thing I wrote, and every once in a while I come up with a dad joke.
Yeah.
But that's basically what I use it for. I'm deeply informed by it too. I sort of follow other people and news sources and try to figure out what's happening.
What's your news source of choice, if I can ask that?
Well, I like the Washington Post. I like Democracy Now! I like the New York Times. Mm-hmm. Those are Breitbart, of course. I read Breitbart every day. No, I just thought I'd swing as far to the right as possible. No, I think those are pretty much my go-tos. Often comedians or political analysts are these days people like Jon Favreau. Not the actor, but the former Obama speechwriter. He's got a good podcast called. It was called. Keeping It 1600, but I believe it's his primary thing now is In Pod We Trust, which I haven't actually listened to, but I kind of try to follow along there.
Cool.
So Jon Favreau is really cool to follow because he's biting and funny and smart, and so someone like him for sure.
Nice.
Yeah. So those things generally. What about you?
I mostly read The Guardian and Twitter.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, The Guardian is good too. Yeah. Didn't mean to forget about The Guardian. They are also great. Yeah. I have the Guardian app on my phone.
Yeah,
so
it's
I don't
a great
think
app.
of that,
great app.
I don't think of that as a Twitter thing. I just look at my phone. It's on my phone, but it's not Twitter.
Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah. Well, I want to go to a song. I think we should go to a song from Saturday Night. Tim, can you pick us a song to go out on?
Cool. Well, I think we kind of. We got pretty heady. How about an instrumental track just to cleanse the palate? People have heard a whole lot of my voice just now.
Okay.
What do you think about First Final Days?
We could do that, sure.
You want a vocal one? Because otherwise maybe Still Waking Up?
No, I don't mind. I don't care. First Final Days, I remember seeing it live, and it reminded me of a Silver Jews instrumental, which may not mean anything to you, but that's what I thought of. A guy like David Berman, very wordy, songwriter and very smart songwriter, and then all of a sudden there would be these little slightly off-kilter instrumental things that I appreciated as well.
Cool.
But anyway, I'm happy to go with that if that's your final answer. Then
well,
I'm
now
fine
you've
with
got
that.
me second guessing myself, but
Well, I don't mean to. No, I'm happy to do whatever. It depends on what kind of flavor you want to give to the people, you know?
Well, I think that'd be a good podcast outro, and then, if people want to hear me sing, they can check out the rest of the record.
Right. Okay, so we'll go with First Final Days?
Cool.
Okay, here it is. This is Tim Darcy with First Final Days. Tim, this was really fun for me, and I appreciate your insights about the world, and I thank you for being on the show, and best of luck with everything.
Totally, Vish. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and yeah, best of luck with everything, and I'll see you around soon, I'm sure.
Brand new music there by Tim Darcy from his excellent new record, Saturday Night. That was First Final Days. Tim, thank you very much for being on the show. I should say, I need to make a correction. At some point, I was talking to Tim about the podcast that Jon Favreau's involved in that I haven't even yet listened to. And I said it was called In Pod We Trust, but I think that's just a thing they invoke when they talk about the thing on Twitter. The podcast, I believe, is called Pod Save America. Pod Save America. So I like keeping it 1600. I have yet to check out Pod Save America, but there you go. I plugged another show. I'm sure Pod Save America is good. I'm going to listen to it right after I finish this. How about that? This podcast is Creative Control. It's available on every podcast platform I think there is right now. And if you want to learn more about how to listen to the show, vishkhanna.com. Also go to patreon.com/creative control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep the podcast version of the show going. It does also air on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph as a radio show Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time. And you can listen to it if you're in the area at 93.3 FM or around the world at CFRU.ca. Also, we're on Facebook and we're on Twitter at Vish Creative, and I'm at Vish Khanna. This episode would not be possible without our sponsors. The finest pizzeria in Guelph, Pizza Trocadero. Call them for pickup or delivery at 519-829-2444 or check them out at trocaderoguelph.ca. The Bookshelf, an independently owned bookstore, bar, music venue, movie theater, and restaurant located at 41 Quebec Street in Guelph. I'll learn more about them at bookshelf.ca. And for the finest coffee anywhere, Planet Bean, freshly roasted, fair trade, certified organic coffee. Visit them at planetbeancoffee.com for more information about their locations and how you too can sell their beans. That's what you can do, planetbeancoffee.com. All right, that's it for this episode. If you're listening and it's still April 2017 and you pledge to our Patreon page, if you pledge $10, I'll send you a t-shirt. That's the deal. If you don't want to do that, that's fine too. Live your life. Have fun. As I say, that's it for me. I will talk to you soon. Goodbye for now.